Hey everyone, I hope that you are doing well. So, we are going to look at the week of the 2nd of November through the 8th of November today. And I'm going to put this one out on Wednesday. I'm still going to try and aim for Thursdays, but the live stream's tomorrow. So, I may as well just do this today and publish it today. But I wanted to talk about there's one major alignment that is quite sad today, or yeah, pretty much today, which is, or it's had a very sad kind of ramification where we have the trine between Mars and Saturn in these water signs, and that Hurricane Melissa landed, and it was really like crazy big and everything. I haven't gotten full updates. Maybe I could check that right now. Just look at Jamaica and see what it did there. From what I understand, it's landing in Cuba right now, but it is down to a category 3. Um, so I'm not seeing crazy numbers of full like messed up, but yeah, there's relief right now. Um, but I wanted to take us back. Part of the reason why I really was kind of harping on that a bit was that last year we had, let's do September 25th of 2024, that Hurricane Helene wound up coming through. And that also took place under a trine of Mars to Saturn in the water signs, with Mars on the other side. Of course, the moon was coming through there on the 25th as well. Now, with that one, the devastation was crazy, but I think the hurricane itself wasn't like that crazy strong. It was just that it poured an insane amount of water on North Carolina and so forth. Um, but now with the grand trine that this is aligned with Jupiter, that was what I was really worried about, was that there was going to be something with bad water issues that got super out of hand. And so, of course, yeah, we wound up then seeing that in what seems to me, I mean, definitely feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't been closely following like hurricane news or anything, but it feels like it was a relatively quiet season before this week with just, you know, bits and pieces here and there. I'm vaguely remembering one that kind of dodged the East Coast a bit before. But also, I noticed because I was looking up when was the date of that Hurricane Helene, and so I typed in North Carolina hurricane because I could the name of it, and it seems like North Carolina is now organizing like aid response, relief response for Jamaica, which is pretty cool and an interesting kind of like coming back to uh, that September of last year alignment as well. Now, additionally, we also have this issue of, I think this I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit more broadly. I have a couple notes here, just like Malay's party winning the midterms, and I was picking up on like that there's issues of extremism when it comes to leadership and so forth, with the placement that the sun was in not too long ago between Jupiter and Pluto. And of course, we have Venus now moving into that area. And I think that's like most of, I mean, with the Mars Saturn trine, there was also like a US Navy chopper and I think a US Navy jet both crashed in or around the South China Sea in separate incidents, like on the same day as well. And that seemed like the Mars Saturn issue to me too. But a little bit more broadly, I don't know why it kept feeling this way to me, that there's something about this issue with the current administration that's calling on people to community aid. And it's kind of a difficult subject to broach because I really personally feel like this is the job of government. This is one of the few reasons to really have government is to fill in the gaps where they're needed. And so those are things that I really support governments doing. But I kept getting the sense of there's going to be failures to provide, of course, because that's the intention. But then there being something about, because of the fact that people have been so in this, especially since, sorry, I keep starting new sentences, especially since the Saturn Neptune conjunction back in 1989, there's been this just handing over of social responsibility to governments and taking mostly just the social responsibility by a lot of people just showing up to vote and fighting with each other about what the purpose of government should be and so on and so forth, but just leaving it to, well, I vote and that's what I do socially. Whereas I feel like this hasn't always been the case because we used to really be more kind of, I guess, village based, like the whole it takes a village kind of concept for a long time, even in, industrialized societies and things like that. Not to mention being in Albania is interesting with all of this as well, because there is more of, like, people definitely walk around with their phones in their hands and stuff like this, but people really know each other around here and engage with each other. And one thing that's always different about life over here for me, and if you are not in the US or probably Canada, then this might be a reverse kind of surprise. But in the States, there's a lot of, like, you do all of your prep for the week stuff, like in terms of grocery shopping and things like this. You do pretty much as much of your shopping on one day of a week, if that, because of the big box stores and everything, and because there's cars and you can just load it up, buy in bulk. It's available at the grocery store, bulk is, and things like this. Here, I mean, there's not even gallons of milk that I think I've ever seen in Europe. You buy your groceries every few days. You have to go out all the time and engage with strangers, engage with the community, talk to people, and so on. And so that's more normal. We didn't always, like, kind of live in this conforming to, to use a cliche, kind of like the machine of society, and just, being tired and doing what we're required to do and trying to carve out some time for socializing and trying to carve out some time for joy and so forth, but just kind of chugging along. And, all we really find that we have energy for, all we really find that's really worth it is voting and trying to push society in one direction or another that way. And I feel like there's been a lot of dissatisfaction, not just in the States and Canada, but I'm kind of everywhere, but definitely all over the West in terms of governance and priorities, basically, of governments. And I mean, even looking at, like, Greece for about 20 years now, it's so incredibly frustrating because there's such clear issues that need to be kind of advocated around within, like, the European Union and so forth. Even here in Albania, there's just an assumption, well, all the politicians are corrupt, screw them. But that, therefore, even more so reinforces we need to figure out our own solution for things, So I I hate to say, not terribly surprised to see that there is now a need, like a direct need, without a doubt, to pull together, and for those who are doing okay to donate food stuff, to volunteer, to try to fill in the gaps. Food banks were suffering for ages, and there's no need for that. People were just voting, and they weren't looking for what can I do for my community. It was no, it's so strange. It feels like there's just been this complete handing over of social solution power, basically. Like there was no need for the food banks to ever really be suffering for so long, even while there were things like SNAP benefits and things like that. Even when the SNAP benefits were higher under COVID, the food banks and stuff were still quite stretched because people just weren't engaging on that level. And now there's this kind of requirement, and I don't know. I think maybe it's the minor grand trine, this one here, that kind of kept bringing that up to me of like, people are going to have to get more directly involved and actually have a hand in the direction of society, not just through voting for team red or team blue, you know, or one of three or four different viable, you know, parties in Europe or whatever, but really directly getting involved. So I don't love, obviously, that that's happening. I think that's one of the few decent things that government typically does, but it is seeming to really light a fire under people to re-engage with communities. And that another thing that has been interesting to me about that is that it's also felt like, not just because of this minor grand trine, but because of where Jupiter is and will be for a little while in Cancer. Because it was over in Capricorn with Mars and Saturn and Pluto during COVID, when communities, even just like social groupings and things like that, really fell apart. And then people haven't felt like generally they've been able to get back to that level of like social aspects of life and things like this. So this opposition from Jupiter to that whole alignment that basically represented the kind of coming apart of community society, it has seemed to me like that's also going to wind up getting challenged by the placement of Jupiter now. Yeah, I think that's kind of a lot of what I wanted to say about that. In terms of the astrology of that kind of craziness, of not holding the reserve, like not allowing the release of the reserve funds for SNAP. It's so hard to like engage with those energies and then like actually look for that stuff in these things, because on the one hand it's just those type of people being those type of people and taking any opportunity that they have. I do have here, I did categorize this under the Mercury Mars opposition to Uranus and the Jupiter opposition to Pluto. That's pretty much how I have it in my head. But you know, I don't even really feel like those things are contingent on the direct triggers of the more day-to-day astrology. I feel like this is the kind of chaos agent energy that we've been, and I use definite scare quotes, like needing in order to get us to directly engage with each other as human beings again, and look at, again, society and community and the way that this is developing. I mean, even just looking at young people and what they've been dealing with, and the fact that those of us who are a little bit older, especially like on social media and stuff like that, there hasn't been enough pushback of like the demonization of young people, and the fact that we all know what these kids have been dealing with for their entire lives, especially the like post 9/11 babies who haven't really known normal ever, or what we knew as normal, which was a lot more calm and a lot more conducive to like the healthy childhood development of, you know, masses of children and things like this. These kids that like have been told, for one thing, by millennials have been complaining a lot about the kind of promises that we were fed and how that wound up not being true. And I've thought for a while about like how much that getting echoed and amplified is part of the expectation of there not being a future among young people, but it is also kind of very true and a call to action usually that millennials are putting out there by complaining about these things. Um, but yeah, I mean, like the fact that we have allowed, for power to be concentrated in a very few hands, and that we haven't really had our hands on the wheel in terms of cultural development, in terms of social development, in terms of the purpose of government in society, in terms of the purpose of wealth in society, and where that's going to be directed and so forth, and rather just getting into these, again, team blue, team red, bickering and fights over things like personality and decorum and so on and so forth that have basically led to this huge crisis from having our hands very much off the wheel for a while. Not to, because I've totally engaged with that as well, not to sound preachy or anything, but again, I just feel like a lot of this has been pushing us back in this direction of needing to connect. And that's one thing with as well, the minor grand trines, or not minor grand trines, the grand trines in water that are coming up, that I've been feeling around that as well, because of the fact that the trine between Jupiter and Saturn is so structural. It speaks directly to society and whether society is functional at all. Our long-term plans, the direction that we're going in, and all of these other planets coming through and kind of triggering that up is going to present us with looking at that from different angles, and especially the human element, the value of human beings and human life and human comfort and things like this. Again, I think that stuff that's going to come up kind of repeatedly throughout the season, and then becoming a lot more active, I think, as we get that minor grand trine permanently moved into the air and fire signs. But with that said, let's go ahead now and dive into realizing I just went on for like 17 minutes. Let's go ahead and go to November 2nd. So looking at this week, it's kind of interesting because we have certain days where there's a bunch going on, and then we have 2 days where even the moon isn't really making any exact alignments. So it's going to be pushes and then rest time and then push and then rest time. So it may feel hopefully relatively a pace that we can keep up with. So on the 2nd, I'll put this at noon, and this is for New York. We have the moon is going into Aries here. And we will have Venus exactly opposite to Chiron. I, of course, pulled that out of here, right? Video, so let me add that back in. So we have Venus opposing Chiron on the 2nd, and we have Venus square to Jupiter. So this T-square is getting activated again. This square is getting activated again by Venus moving through this area. So this is the one where I kept saying there's leadership issues and extremism leadership issues. And then we saw the new prime minister of Japan was elected and is kind of a nationalist and a bit of an extremist. And then Malay's party wound up winning, things like this. So it's those kinds of pulling towards extremes, basically, with leadership when we had the new moon in Libra, pretty much at this point, and the sun was coming through here. Now it's Venus, and so this may feel like there's a desire to connect harmoniously as Venus is making that square to Jupiter, and yet it perfects the square to, or the opposition to Chiron before that. This may actually even be on the 1st in New York time. Well, no, it's on the 2nd. So it's going toward a square with Jupiter, and then it has to oppose Chiron first. And so there may be this kind of like difficulty in keeping emotions in check in connections. And there may be this kind of melancholy aspect to this, or like this kind of ruminating aspect to this alignment. If we're in a place of like reminiscing, which would certainly make sense with the alignments that we just had, that water grand trine, the fact that Mercury is about to go retrograde and so forth. If there's any reminiscing, trying hopefully not to ruminate, or at least not to get too lost in that, unless you're able to kind of do so without difficult feelings around a sense of loss while looking at the past. And there may be some definite matters of like codependency or people pleasing that winds up arising with these alignments here. And I would just say, when it comes to that, try not to like do that, be very people pleasy, and then get frustrated by it because it's not quite reciprocated. And I know that's so much easier said than done. But this just looks to me like that kind of an alignment where there's a huge desire to connect. There is this, wanting to have people to take care of, wanting to be considerate and gracious. There's this kind of sentimental quality to particularly this square between Venus and Jupiter. And like kind of clarity, hopefully, as well, about the kinds of connections that we would like to have, and some excitement about social opportunities and things like this. There's like a real motivation with that square that can get us pretty active toward like creating a sense of harmony and even like an aesthetic of comfort within the home. This could have us, kind of trying to improve our homes to make them more aesthetically comfortable for us as well. Even a tendency toward indulgence when we get squares between Venus and Jupiter, perhaps especially in these two signs where they both have strong dignities and they both are, kind of inclined toward a little bit of indulgence, especially if these are taking place in succeedent houses for you. So, like, for instance, for Gemini rising, that may be especially so. I'm pretty sure that these would be, they're succeedent houses for the mutable rising signs, because the succeedent houses have to do with resources and things like that. And sometimes we can get a little bit more indulgent. I'll just throw out there for Gemini rising, that would be kind of straightforward in terms of indulgences and in pleasures for yourself. In terms of Virgo, this could be really wanting to feel safe and secure and comfortable in relationships that you have, like with your social resources. For Sagittarius rising, this would probably be, I think this is a little bit more cerebral then. Sorry, let me turn my head a little bit. Yeah, that's 11 and 8. So that is very much about social resources. And there may be a kind of questioning quality to that, or a bit of heaviness with that, or a bit of like, I give this and what I get is this, and something maybe being a little bit out of balance there. And then for, who did we not do? Pisces rising, then this would be 5-8, which would also be quite indulgent and potentially like indulging in connections, and possibly not the best kinds of influential connections and things like that. Very like romanticizing for Pisces rising as well. So there is just kind of for everyone as well, just a bit of a risk of overindulgence with that. And there may even be kind of beyond the personal here, there may be a lot of discussion in public around society and its function, again, like who it's meant to benefit, who's kind of being left out of the equation. This would make a lot of sense with the situation that's going on in the States right now. And I mean, there are conversations like that going on in different countries around Europe right now that I'm aware of as well. I think that's kind of an issue that's going on in UK around benefits and so forth. And then, I know that Greece is kind of going through it with kind of threats basically around extending the workday and so forth. Now, neither of these energies, fortunately, are going to want to see people suffer, and they'll both, because they're in cardinal signs, feel pretty impelled to do something about it, to respond to those matters and at least say something about it. Also, with these, there may be matters of like consideration or reasonability or decorum or, humanity and human concerns also when it comes to legal matters that may be public, but that may be on a kind of personal level as well. There may be a lot of just kind of very human and sympathetic judgments made by judges and so forth under this influence, or even by like management and so forth. So we have the moon making a lot of different aspects in this day because it's going through the late degrees of Pisces and then it's going into Aries there. So it's lining up basically with all of these funky like late degree, early degree alignments that we have. So on this day, we have the moon trine to Jupiter. We have it conjunct Saturn. And then, did I go up here? Sorry, it will trine Jupiter. I just realized, like, oh no, I went in the wrong direction. It'll trine Jupiter, conjoin Saturn, trine Mars, conjoin Neptune. And then as it moves into Aries, it will sextile Uranus, and then it will sextile Pluto. And then finally, it will wind up trining Mercury on this day. So this is part of the reason why, for instance, the next day on the 3rd, we don't have any exact alignments because basically all of them are happening on this day. And kind of back to back, because it's 24 degrees to 3 degrees, and, it's just going to be going through that area. So it should be a mostly like pretty exciting and capable day on that level, on the kind of everyday going through the motions kind of level. Hopefully pleasant and positive attitudes, especially since a lot of the moon alignments are going to be on the other side of the opposition of Venus to Chiron. For instance, in the States, this could be like the night before just having weird dreams or thoughts about social connections and anxieties around that, things like that, looking back on, what you've done and all of those, silly thoughts and things like that. But there is a potential to like really want to dream or remain open to opportunities with these alignments as well that the moon is making. When it trines Jupiter, that's going to be the perfect mutual reception between the two. So we love those alignments the whole time that Jupiter's in Cancer. When it comes through Pisces and trines Jupiter, that's just such a really wonderful kind of energy to have. So yeah, probably a really good day to just kind of go with the flow and see where the morning takes you, especially again if you are in the States and this is all kind of happening in the morning time, where we get that mutual reception. That's at midnight actually, but the moon is going through these later degrees in the morning time of Pisces, and then whatever it is that we're kind of deciding to do, then leaning into it a little bit later in the day. I would imagine as well that even if you're not super like just like on it or pushing to get things done, I would imagine that a lot of people are going to kind of incidentally get more done than they're kind of expecting to on this Sunday as well. So that is the second. It looks pretty nice. We just have that little kind of opposition to Chiron, and that may even really help with a lot of the social conversations that are being had, So, as I said, we are not getting any exact alignments on the 3rd. We just have this one stretching out now. And then on the 4th, we will have, here, Mars will trine Neptune on this day. and then it will go into Sagittarius, and then it will oppose Uranus. That it. We also then have, well, we'll talk about the moon in a moment. Let's talk about what Mars is doing, because that's kind of the big kind of showstopper here. So, yeah, as we move in, we have it's pretty much right before midnight in New York. We get the exact trine of Mars to Neptune. Oof. There may be some insomnia. I would plan for insomnia with that alignment there. Just difficulty staying asleep, and maybe weird dreams, maybe difficult or even like dark or a little bit like disturbing dreams and things like that. So if you can kind of get to bed early, that might be wise, just to give yourself some extra time. Now that is very imaginative. It's and that will be building on the third as well. It's not like there's no energies on the third. It's just that nothing's going exact. So we'll discuss this for the fourth. So I will say that the action that's taken under a trine of Mars to Neptune is pretty unlikely to be like grounded or based in reality in the same way that it is when it's in a trine to Saturn. So it's a very different kind of an energy, but it can be utilized in nice ways. It can be utilized for creating a sense of, again, sympathy or compassion or like human understanding. It's good for, yeah, I think I mentioned creative projects and things like that. Again, this Mercury retrograde is going to mess me up. So if I repeat myself in weird ways, just try and be patient with me for a little while here. I would be careful under, like, on the third and fourth with like potentially unwell people, because there can be like spinning tales or woe is me kind of stories that aren't really true, but are actionable. And there's a potential to like chase something or try to contribute to something that isn't really real as well. We can even self-delude ourselves with this trine as well. So I would just kind of be cautious about any of those woe is me kinds of stories that maybe there's a pattern of that, but you're still have your heartstrings tugged on by that when people mention it, you know? So for instance, if there's someone that you know keeps getting in their own way and you know that they could take care of themselves, but they just kind of reach out to others to take care of them, and you know that, but you still feel kind of sympathetic, this is that kind of energy there as well. I would also warn a little bit about getting angry or frustrated, because as this Mars is trine to Neptune, it is also getting really close to that opposition to Uranus. So this energy is still there, you know, not to mention we have this sextile to Pluto that's building up. And I would just recommend, like, it's better to walk away and deal with any sort of anger or frustration later when there's kind of a cooler head. Because this could even, like I said, about self-deluding, we could get super angry about something that isn't real, you know, and then explode about it and then need to deal with the consequences and kind of clean it up and things like that. So unless you are really logically wanting to tell someone off in a creative and eloquent way, you know, I wouldn't be engaging in that kind of thing on this day, because there's likely to just be so many other layers that we're not fully aware of in this moment as well. And also, even if you were to like eloquently tell someone off, they can respond too, you know, so you might be kind of caught off guard by the response as well. I will also say that inattentiveness, and this would apply for the third as well, as these aspects are getting pretty close, inattentiveness could lead to accidents as well. So I would really triple check things, like any sort of dangerous thing potentially that, like when we're setting something up or whatever, we need to check if something's solid. And usually it's just an autopilot that's relied upon, kind of, yes, I did see that, you know, I put the knives sharp side down in the dishwasher or whatever, things like that. And also while driving, for sure. Try not to be too inattentive when it comes to potential risks and things like this. I also would not accept not being able to see or understand something before taking action. So, for instance, if there's any sort of pressure to take action and you feel like, man, I wish I had better info, but whatever, it's probably fine. I'm probably just being paranoid. I would really make sure that if you're dealing with another person, or if you are, for instance, I wouldn't necessarily on this day be hitting the like, when you get there's a SSL certificate that is outdated or something. I wouldn't be bypassing that, things like that. So just generally kind of being a little bit cautious, especially while traveling or communicating or things like this. And I would also, on this day, when it comes to these kinds of belief system or ideology kinds of things as well, it might be best to not go too far out of your way to like defend a position or an ideology. There could be a tendency to kind of misspeak when it comes to that, or like accidental misrepresentation of something. There could even be, during this period of time, intentional misrepresentation of information or knowledge that we wind up even seeing out in the world too. And so some people may, when that is pointed out that this is like misinformation or whatever, some people may like rush to defend it and then kind of have egg on their face afterward. So I would just keep that in mind as well. Yeah, security problems, accidental authorization or unauthorized access to things, I think, can also definitely take place. And I'm looking at this in terms of the basket, really, that's getting created by that Mars as it's moving through this area. It is tapping in with allowance and support from Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. So I would be super careful about your data, things like that. I wouldn't be overlooking any sort of weird, did you log in from this place kinds of things or whatever as well. There may even be some surprise. I don't know if I would want to say like attacks, or like, there could be violence, 100%. I mean, we're dealing with Mars and Uranus there. And the other outer planets aren't doing anything to stop that. So, not to mention, we do have the thing that I haven't said yet that I'm holding off on about the moon, is that will conjoin Chiron. So that could speak to people getting hurt as well. There could even be a weird fake out or like a manipulation around like anticipation of something as well. Or, okay, thinking back to what happened in Orem, Utah, and the fact that there was that big pause where that happened. We all knew it happened, but we didn't know why or how or who. And there was a lot of kind of manipulation around the anticipation of what we were going to wind up finding out about that, and a lot of misinformation in that as well. So that's a little bit what this would look like to me too, in terms of the kind of energy of this alignment. And yeah, of course, when it comes to anything, because we have the opposition itself is Sagittarius to Gemini. So I think I mentioned this in a video recently, but like anything to do with knowledge, communication, understanding, information, media, published media, things like that, philosophy, opinion, belief systems, religion, culture, travel as well, or international exchange and affairs and things like that. the discourse as well, public discourse, there's likely to be a kind of rough, weird disruption there, or on the public scene related to these things, even immigration, when we're dealing with Gemini and Sagittarius. And then there's also that reaching out to Neptune and Pisces there. Anger and outbursts, shocks, violence, hatred, like irrational hatred, can wind up coming up with this as well. On the kind of, there's a contrarian nature to that I know that's something I've been kind of harping on, but it's 100% there. That is very contrarian, and possibly even like a bit nihilistic as well. So it's interesting actually that I was just reminded of what happened in Orem, because I know at this point a lot of people are thinking, and yeah, no, actually it's funny. I remember that we were looking at, I think that was eclipse season, and there kept being this thing about like, wait until the next month to make really a judgment call on what that meant, because there wouldn't be clarity around it until later. And now it seems like it's unclear as to like political motivations or anything like that, but the kind of involvement of the weird kind of forum culture and things like that. I think that kid probably, there was like the gaming thing. It's probably 4chan, or I don't know. It was like when I was a kid, I know a lot of the more complicated, annoying kids that I knew were into like something awful and so forth, which, there were decent corners of that one, but that may also be a thing that winds up coming up here, is action taken kind of out of nihilism as well. And just as much of a breakdown, there could be like breakthroughs, there could be, a lot of energy that's driven up by this, a lot of excitement, this kind of sparks and, urges to start something basically, that is also like pretty explosive in terms of kicking something off or catalyzing something as well. So that could be a movement or something as well that would wind up really gaining some steam too. So it won't all be bad, but there's a huge potential for it to go kind of rough. So yeah, this conjunction of the moon and Chiron is kind of reinforcing, the edges of this day, and potentially even because it's feeding into what still is a T-square to Venus and Jupiter there. And so the whole like ruminating, reminiscing, like codependency versus interdependency, like people pleasing and frustrations and things like that around all of those issues may wind up kind of looming a bit larger in this day as well, or just kind of heartache over something. And yeah, as I meant, so the moon also speaks to the people when it comes to mundane astrology, and it being attached to like the wounded healer on a day where we have an opposition between Mars and Uranus. I don't love that too, on a kind of literal level. But yeah, that is the fourth and possibly third as well. Far back was this? Yeah, I would say like third, fourth, fifth, the sixth, we're even not quite to, where's that? Yeah, it's on the 6th that we wind up getting to that Mars sextile to Pluto. So that basket hasn't even wrapped up, for a few days. So yeah, I would definitely give that some time. And of course, it looks like the moon is going to hop in over here and kind of reactivate that as well. So yeah, it looks like there's going to be some bumps around that time. Most of the rougher edges of that is probably going to be out in society, but we all may feel kind of frustrated just about things that we're dealing with. And there is a risk of like exploding or doing something that we kind of wind up regretting. So that's something I would really recommend kind of keeping in check um, on those days as well, really throughout this whole middle of the week. So let's look at the full moon in Taurus then. So this one's going to be at 8:19 a.m. here. So here is the full moon in Taurus, and this is ruled by Venus, which is out here very late in Libra, and it is very much in the midst of that having squared Jupiter, and then the next thing is then squaring that Pluto there. And in this third decan where extremes are an issue of Libra. Venus can handle this area a little bit better because it is very dignified. It's its own sign. But I do feel like that is going to be a little bit uncomfortable, and that this full moon may bring a kind of physical or practical aspect to that as well, where it's not just a social question. There's something more rounded or more kind of material about what's going on there. So yeah, I would say when it comes to any sort of extremes, to just kind of ground yourself during this period of time may be super helpful with that. Slowing down, I think, is going to help with this quite a bit as well. That moon is exalted in Taurus, and it's ruling, that Jupiter, which is exalted in the moon's sign. So that can help to kind of take some of the edge off of this. But yeah, just slowing down quite a bit, I think, is going to be great, and simplifying things. There may be, during this kind of broader period of time, a lot of like ideas and projects and activities and like opportunities and communicating and information overload and overstimulation and stuff like that. So again, this is just going to be really helpful if we can take time with decision making, really use reason, try to take into consideration long-term planning with the decisions that we're making around this time. I think it's going to be worth it. I wouldn't always personally recommend that, just because you can get into analysis paralysis. But I think that that's actually going to be helpful during these kinds of alignments. Now, this full moon, because it's pinging or speaking to that Venus too, between this issue of extremes, we could see that wind up arising again in the world, perhaps less around matters of leadership because it's not the sun that's there, but maybe more around like legalities and extra legal activities around relational dynamics with regard to women, perhaps as well. Out in the world, we may see extremes of relationship dynamics around us as well, or hopefully not in our own relationships as well. When it comes to women, there could be legal concerns or like laws pertaining to women, leadership among women, or attempts to like control or claim women in some way, or to speak for, this could also have to do with extremes within communities, or like with Libra, we also deal with institutional and kind of professional matters as well. There could also be like an international law kind of dynamic that's going on there as well. With these as well, the moon and Jupiter and Venus in the mix here, as opposed to the other insanity that's going on in the sky, I also wouldn't be surprised if there is a kind of discussion around, again, matters of decorum, like proper behavior, reasonability. There may be a lot of opportunities to kind of take the higher ground, or to take the high road here. And some may do that in a very conspicuous way. I wouldn't say that that would necessarily be a problem, But yeah, that's kind of a lot of what I'm getting out of that full moon. The moon itself isn't really configured to much. So it may be one of the ones that isn't quite so loud and extreme, um, but rather just more so encouraging us to kind of slow down and simplify things around this period of time and get really practical about things. So, with that said, let's go ahead and scooch this forward to the 6th, where we have Venus will go into Scorpio on the 6th. Mars will sextile Pluto on this day as well. And then the moon is going to activate all of these placements again on this day. So with Mars sextile to Pluto, there is a definite potential for like working in support of others energetically and enthusiastically towards some notions of like progress or openness or like liberality or freedom or, you know, ability to maybe be non-conforming or to push things forward, basically. But there is also it's kind of similar to the trine from Mars to Saturn, where it can be used in effective ways, but we can't overlook the fact that these are energies that do tend to cause problems. So even when we get flowing aspects between them, we still want to look at it as there's almost guaranteed to be problems that wind up coming out of that. So this is, of course, feeding into that basket that we've already discussed, but this is also really going to be contributing to potential hatred or like anger or on this side of it, it's more like control and power and manipulation kinds of energies. Uranus Mars isn't in itself very manipulative at all. It's more so very straightforward, but potentially totally nuts, you know? With Pluto, I think I even described it when I was talking about Mars in the Mars video that I just put up, that the Mars-Uranus dynamic is a little bit more skitsy, you know, where the Mars-Pluto dynamic is a little bit more pathological, you know, or like dark or sinister, basically, or malignant, you know. So we could see some of that energy, like that kind of cruelty or utilization and abuse of power, ego issues, id issues as well. This doesn't help with the issue of extremes that we've had coming up, because both of those can definitely go to extremes. Explosive kinds of feelings. Some people lacking scruples and trying to have that kind of, you know, not be super noticed. And there's when we're dealing with Aquarius and Sagittarius, that is matters of like collective belief, big picture. You know, leaps forward, issues of independence, of nonconformity, individuality. There can be some dogmatism with that as well. Again, the contrarianism is very much in there. The defiance is very much in there. And again, depending on our perspective, we can like where those energies are coming from sometimes and not like other times that we see those energies coming through. So for instance, think of an example. So, I mean, we could even look at like a character like Kurt Cobain, who was non-conforming and progressive ideologically and kind of philosophically inclined and progressive and things like that, and very like spunky and kind of in people's faces about it, and a bit defiant and even contrarian about some of those things, because he was trying to show how norms were social constructs and things like this. Or you can get people like Stephen Miller, who also is contrarian and defiant, but coming from a different place, you know. I would not want to get into the head of someone who would find that endearing, but there are people who would, you know. So just kind of always as well keeping in mind, especially with all the ideological stuff that's going to be coming up for us, just keeping in mind that it's hard for me to say that there is a kind of relative subjectivity that's inherent in these things, because either you're for harming people or you're not, in my view, you know. It really just kind of comes down to that. But yeah, keeping in mind that there are those differences and that these energies can come out in multiple different ways depending on someone's quote unquote perspective, you know. So yeah, the moon is also lighting all of this up on this day. So this is really getting reinforced. We're very much dealing with that basket again on this day. And it seems kind of to, it seems like this day kind of quickly becomes about power dynamics and connections with other people. We may even find ourselves in little, what is it called? Like conflicts of will, even if it's very low key. With other people, like, you know, catching a person who works somewhere on at a weird moment, you know, and then getting into the unspoken kind of snippiness with each other that can sometimes take place. It kind of quickly becomes about that, and like control over the environment as well could be a major aspect of this, or like the ability to command attention, or to command like the conversation or the topic, basically. So there can be this kind of overbearing quality to this alignment as well that I think is going to come out a little bit more on the back end of this alignment, where there's someone that's kind of trying to dominate or steer or control or manipulate the conversation, basically, that's being had here. And there can be, like I said, a lot of determination and coordination towards some goals, toward trying to push things forward. But 100%, the 5th, the 6th, I would expect for this day to take weird turns. You know, like just don't expect for things to just kind of all go according to plan. And as well for some like reactions and responses to be more boisterous or louder or more extreme than usual. So I wouldn't go around pushing buttons, you know, on these days as well. And there's kind of like, there's this general overstimulation, I feel, to this day. The moon will even eventually wind up opposing Mercury on this day too. So we're getting this whole freaking thing getting lit up. And so again, it would be wise to try and lean back on that full moon again, to try to stay pretty grounded and non-reactive and allow for things to shake out as they will, like to respond to matters that come up after the fact, like intentionally and not knee-jerk, not in the moment, because I think that people could quickly get sucked into matters that aren't very desirable. Again, there's going to be like an energy or energies around controlling the conversation and pushing it in a conflictual direction, or pushing it in a pathological kind of a direction. And if we want to avoid that, I think it would just be good to kind of stay mindful about that kind of thing. So yeah, the 6th looks like a bit of a weird mess as well. Fortunately, once we get to the other side of that, we again have this kind of untethered moon for a little bit. There's nothing going exact on this day. We've completed a lot of the alignments that we're going to be dealing with for quite some time. In fact, let me look at this. It looks like on the 8th, we're getting a Venus square to Pluto. Oh, yeah. Well, that one's about to. It's mostly going to be Pluto, though, that it'll be aligning to, because these are quincunxes and they can go a little bit more quiet. So on the 8th, we're mostly just getting like the planets doing their own independent thing that's standing out. So Mercury is going to station retrograde on the 8th. Uranus goes back into Taurus on the 8th as well. And yeah, Venus will square Pluto a little bit earlier. So again, we have things taking a different turn than we're expecting. With that Mercury switching direction, let me make my point a little stronger by, yeah, there we go. Pushing that forward a few hours. So it'll be technically afternoon on the 8th, but that Mercury's very much switching direction, 7th, 8th, 9th. Ideas, conversations are definitely taking a totally different turn than expected. We were in Uranus in Gemini land and Mercury going direct land. And now both of those matters of conversations and ideas and exchange and things like that. The ruler of Jupiter or of Gemini and the this planet is leaving Gemini, you know. So that's the kind of common thread there. They're both switching. And so again, ideas, conversations taking just such a different turn than we expected. And where we thought we were kind of headed in terms of ideas, conversations, stories, is we're actually headed in a very different direction in the short to medium term than we initially thought, basically. So I would also during this time, because we have this debilitated Mercury stationing and switching direction, plus we just had that little jolt at the 0 degree mark of Gemini. When it comes to mind, be very careful. So mindlessness, or again, lose inattention, like losing your focus on things, accidents and things like that while traveling or moving about, like even just moving your body. There may be kind of coming out of this. We may not be fully aware of this, like on the 8th, that in the coming couple of weeks at least, that we have now Mercury retrograde and Uranus back in this old place. We may feel like we're kind of getting stuck or going back, you know? And I don't think that we're actually going back. And I don't think that that's what we're actually getting called to do. I think that we're getting called to look at things from a different angle that have happened in the past, maybe over, again, this is the retrograde of Uranus back into Taurus. So it's speaking to everything since 2018. So looking back over that, reprocessing it and reframing it, re-narrativizing it, with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight. That's another thing with the retrogrades, especially of Mercury, that is beneficial, even though it's annoying to not be able to speak and not be able to think straight. It does give a sense of being able to do things then with hindsight, being able to do things again, you know, and look at things again, basically from a different perspective, with some knowledge gained by that point, you know. So we may find ourselves kind of what looks like backsliding when it comes to our thoughts, or trying to land on something that kind of feels like it makes sense or feels familiar. Maybe if there's been something super funky going on this week in the world, this could be the moment where we find where the news maybe slows down and we have a moment to be like, well, damn, that was another future changing week, you know, and kind of collecting ourselves on the other side of that and looking at things a little bit differently, and therefore wishing to, again, kind of go back to before these things happened or whatever. Again, I'm going to keep kind of preaching about we can't go back. And this is, all of these retrogrades are really just about reprocessing, reframing, re-narrativizing around these things. I would say, any new ideas that have come up very recently, this could kind of bring us back to the foundation of those and looking at those at a baseline kind of level and see if there's any like baseline changes that we're wanting to make along those lines and any sort of internal changes or shifts that we may feel like we want to make, basically, to reflect how we have evolved or what we've learned, what we have freed ourselves from in recent years as well. It's looking back on Uranus's time, freeing us up and defying our assumptions of Taurus, of stability, of security, of long-term standing, of normalcy, of the ground basically beneath our feet and the grounding of society and so on and so forth. So even for ourselves, what we've freed ourselves from in recent years, what we've learned in recent years, that's going to be coming up quite a bit. It may not, like I said, this may not all hit on like the 8th, because this is kind of a broader process basically that we're stepping into here. It's not an aspect. It's Mercury's going to be retrograde for a little while. Uranus is going to be in Taurus until like the 26th-ish of April. I think it's going to be retrograde until some point in like December or January or something like this. There may even be matters of like innocence that are being held on to, or like where that's been lost or disrupted, or like kindness. Looking back over how Uranus has disrupted Taurus as well, for all of us. I think a lot of us feel like we've seen some stuff, at this point. And we all know that we've all seen some stuff. We all know that we've all processed on some level the weird, high conflict personalities taking over the, ruling class leadership at this point, and going all full mask off, and the weird thoughts that we have about that and fears that we have about that. That's kind of like a collective thing that we all know now, that we've thought about a bit. And there can be a sense of like loss of innocence and all of that as well. Knowing that everyone has an opinion on a lot of different things at this point is kind of weird. But yeah, again, like matters relevant since 2018 could wind up taking a pretty sharp turn due to some internal, again, reprocessing, reframing, different desires and things like this, wanting to evolve and push in a new direction, and yet needing to look back over some of the past as well. I hope that makes sense. Taurus can also be kind of a bit indulgent. We are going to get an opposition of this Mercury retrograde to Uranus in Taurus. Both of these signs can be a little bit indulgent, so there may be a need to review any sort of indulgent habits or matters of like security and insecurity, and what you feel like you can't free yourself from as well. These things would really be defying you to do that, really encouraging you to not make assumptions about things that you can't change, Also, really kind of recalibrating as well before we go into that more active era too. Let me see. Let me look quick. I also have here reviewing limitations to change, or how convention or comfort keeps you like in a comfort zone that lacks some level of growth. The integration of that Uranus and Taurus as well, if you have some sense of what that's meant for you, integrating that more, integrating the pleasures discovered in recent years as well, and slowing down connectivity. I remember that was something that I was mentioning when Uranus went into Gemini, of like, if we think that we've been overstimulated to this point, like that's nothing, and that was in the summer, and things have just gotten completely crazy since then. So this could have us kind of disconnecting a little bit as well. I would not be surprised by that. Um, I also have here like surprising return of a matter, an idea, a perspective, or a group. So even since Uranus has been in Gemini, there may be some insights on like how you've changed. And let's see. Yeah, land and finance shakeups. I think I mentioned this in the Uranus return video, like financial shakeups and reckoning. Um, Potentially more speculation on crypto and stuff like that again. Economic course correction may be a part of this, since this is our last go. Land disputes, consolidation, financial strategies, network, agricultural issues, unfortunately, come up here. That Uranus going back into Taurus when we have issues with farmers. Be interesting. We may see that becoming a more vocal issue as well, and potential for land grabs as well. That's also reinforced by the fact that there is a sextile that's not going to perfect. Yeah, it's not going to perfect at all in those signs. But and I'm thinking that it didn't. Sorry, I'm kind of trying to wrap my brain around running those things back. Yeah, no, the last aspect that we had between Jupiter and Uranus was that conjunction, I think, in April of 24. But yeah, I think it was 24. We're not going to get the sextile perfected until after Jupiter goes retrograde and goes direct. Uranus will hop into Gemini in late April, and then in July or like late June, maybe we get that's the alignment that's happening at 4 degrees, where when Jupiter's at 4 degrees, it's going to be opposite Pluto at 4, and it'll be trine to Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, and sextile finally to Uranus at 4 degrees. But this is an orb. So that sextile is kind of already there a bit. It's kind of like how I've been saying, there's kind of an opposition between Jupiter and Pluto, even though it's not going to perfect yet. So when it comes to like land grabs and expansionism and things like that, especially now with Mars out in Sagittarius, there can be this kind of like adventuring in a not so great way, in a kind of colonial-ish way, kind of energy that winds up coming up with that. And yeah, it's going to look for a bit like consolidation of right, basically. I will say that this period of time mirrors back to the 40s, in the period of time which I think was like, it was like approximately November of 41 or December until like March or April or something of 42. And the tide did start to shift, where the imperial or the Axis powers, the Axis powers were still on top of the situation big time. They were still dominant. That's the word that I'm looking for. But the tide had started to turn. That was, of course, Pearl Harbor took place with that. And then also, it was like Battle of Moscow or something like that, where there was finally the USSR started to beat back and have some victories against Germany as well. So it's going to be a funky time. It's going to look probably like consolidation and like domination, though, during this period of time. But again, last time that we had that last, let me just pull this up real quick. It was, let's do 11:30, then 40. So this is that last bit of Uranus and Taurus. It was conjunct to Saturn at that point. Went retrograde, went back in, October of 41. And then let's see when it finally moved out. So this was when the tide kind of started to turn, even though it looked like the axis was still dominant. So that went until May. So October of 41 to May of 42. That's kind of the Uranus period of time that we're in. Whereas what we've been in with that Uranus and Taurus was the equivalent of the mid to late 1930s. So you can see how it's like there's a little bit of a kind of ray of hope there as well. Even though it's going to look ugly right now, it's going to look like they're still very much dominant. So, yeah, I think that's kind of everything that I had about that one. The Venus square to Pluto happening at the same time. And that's interesting because basically we have the ruler of Uranus when it was in Gemini is switching direction. And then the ruler of Uranus as it moves into Taurus is now square to Pluto. So disruptions around power, information, propaganda, probably as well. Fear mongering, like controlling people through messaging, I think is, again, going to be kind of a big thing here. Yeah, so more issues of power dynamics. Again, hopefully not directly regarding women, but it's possible with Venus in detriment now. Aid issues could become a problem. We had a bit of help with that when we had both Jupiter and Venus in good dignities. Now in Scorpio, Venus is in detriment, so that can become more of an issue. There is some kind of like sympathy and support that winds up, it's a factor because we have a trine from the moon in Cancer to this Venus in Scorpio. So there is some sympathy, some support that winds up developing, but it's out of something that could be kind of complicated and rough, and may require for Venus to kind of stand up for itself and to leave those kinds of matters of decorum behind in Libra. As it's stepping into Scorpio, it may need to be more comfortable shaking things up and doing things in these kind of unconventional ways. It will get a lot of support. This is mostly the issue that Venus will have here. Otherwise, it's going to wind up creating a bunch of trines to the other planets and water things. But on this day, there's a little bit of an issue there. We may see it like conversation or discourse around violations of rights, violations of law, exploitation specifically, of vulnerable people as well. Let me look at my notes real quick. Yeah, I would avoid emotional manipulation during this period of time. There's also an ability with this on a personal level, but also publicly to like address matters of vulnerability, of sensitivity and imperfections. On a personal level, maybe even on a public level, where we're like scared to open up or like stigmatized topics and things like this may wind up coming up. There could be something around psychological dynamics and things like that, like fears that we have maybe in relationships or difficulties that we have in relationships or difficulties that are going on with relationships as a public discourse kind of a thing as well. Issues of like self-acceptance, self-love, self-care, it may be wise to check in on this day as well, like how you're feeling about any sort of connections that you have. Do they make you feel good about yourself? Do they make you feel supported? Or do they make you feel very uncomfortable about like there's something wrong with you, on a subtle level? Reflecting on that, I think, would be really good to kind of see who's on side ultimately, but also checking in like, how is it that looking back on your interactions with other people, how do you think that they walked away feeling about themselves as well, from their interaction with you? and maybe trying actively to utilize that hindsight, that moment to moment kind of hindsight there, and tap it basically for lessons about how maybe you can relate to people a little bit more sympathetically, and things like that, and kind of create more of a sense of harmony and ease and comfort in, you know, humans being humans, humans being vulnerable and imperfect, and so on, throughout this time as well. So there can also be like putting a lot of effort into spiritual connections, or like a strong desire to develop spiritually throughout this day. But I would just be a little bit careful about, you know, making sure that you're energetically protected and things like that with that square there. You may feel like, oh, I'm super safe and etc., and kind of open up a channel, and then, you know, maybe you pissed someone off 10 years ago and you start to feel like that kind of old energy or something like that, you know. The moon on this day will also, a little bit earlier than this, it will have squared Saturn and Neptune. And so the previous night, because that'll actually be quite early in the States, here, run that forward. And this is Friday, so like if you're going out at night, there may be some frustration on that night around not being on the same page, like regarding plans or ideas, or like the bases of knowledge and information. There may be a mismatch there. You may feel like you're talking past people, or like there's just fundamentally not a mutual understanding. And there may be a difficulty between like feeling or sentiment, or what you know in your heart to be true, versus evidence and logic and things like that, you know? So take it from someone who has all of my personal stuff is squares between Pisces and Gemini. That is definitely that kind of energy that can come up. So yeah, if you encounter that, just all of it's valuable. The evidence, the logic, and checking things against that is valuable, but so is the sentiment and the gut knowing of things. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for this week of the 2nd through the 8th. It's going to be kind of noisy, but there are also going to be those 2 different days, like the 3rd and the 7th, where none of the aspects are going exact, and we don't have like direct switches. There's probably still going to be that buildup of the basket that we're feeling during those days, but it may give us just a little bit of a moment here and there to process the other kind of loud stuff that's going on. And again, utilizing that full moon to really remind us to stay grounded, to slow down, to simplify, to not feel the need to push things, and to focus on like what makes us feel comfortable and at peace and secure within ourselves. And then everything else that's good is a bonus to that. But a lot of the fights and the push and pull that will be going on in this week, especially on an interpersonal level, I think is not going to be worth it to really engage in. And I think we're going to be reviewing a lot of these things on a social level anyway, because a lot of this is the Uranus, which is, you know, retrograde and going to be going forward. These placements retrograde, they'll be going forward. That Mercury is going to go retrograde and go forward. We're going to deal with all of this stuff basically coming up again. So it's unlikely that we have the full picture at this point anyway. And yet, of course, a lot of people are going to do the explosive reaction, you know, kind of thing. And it may just be wise for our own sake, for our own energy, to let them, you know. Yeah, so I think that is pretty much what I have. Sorry, I know I'm seeing now that I went pretty long. Yeah, the live stream is going to be tomorrow on Thursday. I think that's going to be around 11 or noon, I think, on the East Coast. And else? I am going to try to like create a different way that memberships can also work. I'm going to keep the YouTube memberships as they are. Um, but I've gotten like emails from quite a few people who've wanted to join, but they have either they don't want to deal with YouTube, or some people are wanting to do like yearly stuff and so forth. So I'm going to have a website, and there will be an additional area that will be opened up as well, to kind of engage with. I'll see if I can set up like an actual forum, because I feel like that would be pretty cool. Um, I haven't I haven't done that kind of like back end website stuff for quite a while. So it's going to take a little while, but yeah, that's something that I'll kind of be working on as well, to expand all of this. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to keep the things the way that they are on YouTube as well. So, that should all be fine. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I have. So I will talk to you all tomorrow, and I hope you have a wonderful day and